Aloy is back, even more acrobatic and heroic than ever. Guerrilla Games' smash hit new character, world and adventure now has a sequel to cement it as another massive IP for the ever-growing PlayStation portfolio. They are no strangers to console launches and have long since been a leading technology hurricane for gaming as a whole, kicking off the PlayStation 4 generation in grand style with Killzone Shadowfall, a game that still stands proud today at 60 FPS on the PlayStation 5. But there is no doubt that the magical Dinobots meets brave adventure of Horizon was something of a revelation for them and Sony when it smashed its way onto the platform in 2017. The Decima engine was a massive piece in that jigsaw, being an engine that not only gained a marketed name once it went multi-platform with Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding a couple of years ago. Now at the dawn of a new generation, they're back once again to see if lightning can strike twice with Forbidden West. But this time with the extra overhead of being a cross-generation title, which I did expect, as I mentioned in my previous PS5 reveal video back in June, I think it was, last year. This will of course limit options, choices and scope, but Guerrilla have done a great job of hiding those limitations with a cracking demonstration yesterday. Now I'm about to spend the next 10 minutes or so going over some areas I found to be very impressive. Now the first is obviously polygonal and object density. It doesn't really take me to tell you that the world feels so alive, full and grounded. From the smooth round bonds of the injured soldier at the start to the sheer volume of machines, construction and intricacies they have, the team have certainly utilised the additional polygon pushing power of the PlayStation 5. Now remember, the original Horizon Zero Dawn was already a big poly pushing machine, 550,000 polygons just for the Thunderjaw alone. The game was maxing out the potential of the PlayStation 4 in terms of vertices. So they really are pushing forward on this, and it'll be interesting to see just how the PlayStation 4 version holds up, but I'm pretty sure they won't be utilising the primitive engine of the PlayStation 5 just yet. Again, those cross-generation limitations are probably one of the limitations that they're holding them back a little here in terms of what they could potentially do if it was just a PS5 title directly.
Gotta keep moving.
And you can see those limitations here. When she walks down this path, you can see the LOD switches. They're still using LOD, they're still using shadow cascade. You can still see objects fading in, popping in certain points of the title. It uses that dithered construction of the mesh object itself, and these reduction in LODs is exactly why this is a PlayStation 4 title. And it looks like a PlayStation 4 title. I know that sounds very epic, but the way the game's constructed, the techniques they're using and they're still using for the Decima engine, they can't change everything when they have to run this on a PlayStation 4. So everything they do has to scale between that level of power, and that means they're still limited by using the same rendering and construction methods they use in the original Horizon Zero Dawn, and that's why we're seeing very similar LOD switches with much further draw distance and much higher density. All these things can be reduced when they run it on the PlayStation 4, and that will make significant impacts in terms of the resolution and the performance because they're reducing the amount of triangles on screen, and that is a very big overhead on any game. It doesn't get talked about more. It was used to be the big conversation in the 32-bit era, but it's still a big problem for engines in how much you can push through. You can see the density of the worlds are still very high, much higher than a lot of the objects we saw in Horizon Zero Dawn. There seems to be more natural constructions here and high density of objects when you walk around. These will be the highest quality object meshes that they can import from ZBrush or Maya or whatever they design their objects in, and then these will be LOD 0, and then on the PlayStation 4 they'll be cutting all these back. And then obviously you can see that they use the same techniques from Decima. So they use screen space reflections mixed with cube maps on the water surfaces here. You can see the object in behind and in other areas of the game. And this is exactly the same as Horizon Zero Dawn, where they use screen space reflections and then they just merge those back with projected cube maps on water surfaces just to hide that blend. And then you get things like screen space shadows, which are drawing in here on some of these areas. So again, I'm not saying they're going to revolutionize the entire rendering system in terms of a PlayStation 5 engine, but they can't use the geometry engine, or at least its limited use in terms of rendering the whole game using that, and then moving over to something like meshlets, and reducing that complexity to like nanite that we saw on Unreal Engine 5. All of those techniques take a long time to implement, and you need to design them specifically for the hardware that's going to run it. That's why you're going to get that cutoff both in the console space and the PC space with games that can use that and Lumen, and that's exactly the same challenge that the Guerrilla have got here. They need to ensure that all these techniques still play well with the older generation of hardware, and then they ramp up the quality, which they've clearly done here in terms of utilising the PlayStation 5 hardware. It's likely not the most efficient use of it, but it's a damn impressive one nonetheless.
The way out is down!
Talking of impressive, the water bodies, the water physics and the interaction has been massively ramped up. One of the weaker areas I discussed in my analysis back then, and Horizon Zero Dawn certainly had good amounts of water in there, but the interaction, like many games, was quite flat, like a blanket of water. It stood out. Here, it's obviously a core game mechanic, a core game loop. You traverse and explore water bodies quite a lot, clearly, looking at this demonstration, and obviously the original reveal trailer. And they've ramped this up by using the seaweed, the caustic reflections, the coral on the ground, the schools of fish, all of the light and the caustics on the surface of the water, which you can see the distortion above. It's all been massively and significantly improved, and it just creates what is a core aspect of this title I've seen, which is that interaction, that physicality. I mentioned at the start, the density, the grounding of the world. Look at the amount of particle systems here with the bubbles, the streams of water, the current pushing you across. The schools of fish are likely a particle construction as well, as is the seaweed and the grass. And all of these elements combine to give a very realistic world. They use chromatic aberration here, they use volumetric lighting, they've got light refraction at the top of the surface, and all those schools of fish. Everything just gives a real ambience, and that's all enhanced by that lighting and the colour system. It's very saturated, very dreamy looking game, and that's all around the light objects and the saturation levels. Now, the game used GI originally. The original Horizon Zero Dawn used the real-time lighting system, time of day, and it used GI bounce on interiors and objects in the title. You can see it in the cave here as I shift the time of day on the PlayStation 4 Pro. You can see that light bounce internally, how it illuminates other areas of the scene and undersides of objects, and this is likely a light map solution, so they're probably using something similar here. Whether they're going to use ray tracing on the PlayStation 5 to enhance that, potentially, I don't know, but looking at the quality here, you can see light bounce under objects. You can see that almost hero lighting above Aloy herself. Now, I'm not saying she has got it, because she definitely, you know, goes into different areas and gets the ambience and the hue of other areas when she's walking through green, but you can definitely see a kind of silhouette, that rim lighting, that Fresnel edge around her. She's kind of placed out of the scene to stand out, almost like a plastic model, and that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. But the construction of the scene and a lot of the objects, certainly the real-time cinematics, you can see light bounce caustics on the ground, you can see where light is bouncing and kind of phasing through shadows to lighten them, and all of that gives a level of believability to the world where everything looks very consistent and very solid. And this is all down to the models and the construction. You can see lots of underside lighting here on the creatures as they walk through into the sand. You can see it lighting up underneath their bodies. You can see that physics and the actual construction of their bellies, the vertices stretching and bobbing around like a weighted bag, like real skin almost, here on the bottom of the large dinosaur to the left. You can see it wobbling and bouncing as it walks, but you can see that light underneath across all objects. And then as Aloy here walks through the grass, look at the underside of the objects as she walks through. Watch the hue on her arm, the skin, her hair. It kind of picks up the tones around her, so they're definitely using a level of light bounce in the game where it's affecting objects as they walk through. And you can see, you know, static objects certainly look more grounded in the area, with light bouncing off certain areas, certain colour hues, and as she walks through you can see that tone, but she still almost stands out in the area that she's in. That rim lighting around her hair, around her arms, and almost that very grounded, plasticky, physically based lighting on her body really makes her look different from every other object around the title. And I like the look, it's a very distinct look and it's very realistic, and that's also down to things like her hair. So her hair has improved massively, and not just on her head. You see these small micro hairs we've all got on our skin, everyone has them. They show up in many shots here. You can see them rendered almost at a strand level, which may be a continuation of the tech that's driving Aloy's hair itself, but the various bunches that sway and bob and collide on her head and body, these spline defined water physics as well that cause her hair to bounce, sway and collide underwater, these are enriched more by that light calculation I've just mentioned. Remember, this is gameplay, so you can see here that light is scattering through and across that Fresnel edge of her hair, something we saw a lot in the original, but due to the extra power and refinements to Decima, the artist can enhance this, use it more, and raise its fidelity to make it both more abundant and more accurate. And that light here where she's waiting for that creature to pass by and her hair is just bobbing and swaying around, it looks brilliant, and that's the kind of quality you expect in cinematics, and we're getting this in real time already on the PlayStation 5. I really am impressed by what they're doing here in terms of the physicality of objects and the world. Again, though, you can see obviously where they're sacrificing some of that. There's dithering there in terms of the shading costs, and all of that is intelligent use. Looking at this image, I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I'm almost sure they're using their checkerboard technique from the original PS4 Pro version here to bring it up to that sharp, improved quality that we're seeing. And all of this is most likely pointing towards the fact that all the things that I've just mentioned in terms of the PS4 base means that this is likely going to be the high fidelity mode, and that performance mode that we saw in the previous version will also be here, but most likely on the PlayStation 5, due to the extra power, the bandwidth, and certainly that Zen 2 CPU, there'll be a 60 FPS mode with some of these things reduced back down just to get to that level that we expect from a 60 FPS title. It looks so dense and so real consistently throughout the title that I don't think anyone can complain that this doesn't look impressive already. What also immediately jumped out is obviously the animation, the motion capture, the real-time cinematics, the animation and motion capture in the game itself. All of this has been significantly improved. You know, from the subtle movements of people's faces, the way they interact with the world, the skin shaders, the wet shader, everything has been ramped up. That wooden movement that we saw in a lot of areas of Horizon has been improved significantly here. The fluidity of her face, the expressions, the nuance of the muscle and fat deformation, the way her eyes move, the expressions and her thought process can be seen now on her face, where it was relatively static in the older game. Now, I still suspect that some of these dialogue sections, which are designed to be diverse and allow you to communicate with multiple characters, multiple models and vectors and all those kind of things, that will still be in there, and it might not be as good as what we're seeing in these real-time cinematics. But the PBR-based materials and the lighting cannot be removed from the fact that this is one of the reasons why it looks so good. But it's also the muscle and fat deformation, the nuances of her lips where it's stretched. Look at him choking and spluttering. All of those areas, look so realistic compared to what we saw in the previous titles, and certainly on many other titles. You can see expressions and thought processes in people's eyes and faces. It's all been captured from the actual actors themselves and then enhanced by the artist. And I'm sure the in-game character model will be even better. It was a great model, but it was very flat and very inanimate in terms of the game itself. Her face, her eyes didn't move, her mouth didn't move, and it's one of the things I covered in the original review. And I'm sure these things will be improved here, not due to the power of the PlayStation 5, but due to the the skill of the teams, the time, the expertise, the experience. All those things ramp up, and just like we've seen with previous titles on other games, in-game character models are getting much closer to their real-time cinematics, to the point where there's hardly any difference between them other than additional shader passes and additional lighting passes. And this also carries over to the in-game animation, the fluidity and blends, the way that she shifts from one combat sequence to the next, the speed of her, the fluidity of combat, she zigzags and back and attacks people, or she runs through these areas. All of that is much better than it was on the original Horizon Zero Dawn. And then that interaction, those particle elements, as she's running and kicking up sand, and it leaves little normal maps behind her, or it may even be tessellation, but it certainly is here with the mammoth attacking you and shooting through the sand, leaving those tessellated trails, those particle effects kick up and splash around the edges. All of that looks superb, and it really adds that level of believability and solidity to the world, because everything just looks so solid and real, physically based, just like the sap weapon there where she fires that sap glue and ties the mammoth up, and the vertices there just stretch around, a little bit like the lasso from the first game, to the destruction. I love this shot here where the waves just crash in and splash around the feet of the mammoth as you're fighting mid-battle. That water in this game is absolutely cracking. I'll touch on that in a little moment, but the destruction is great. It's certainly, again, like most things, a refinement and enhancement of what we saw. So the original Horizon had all of that in the game as well. You could destroy objects, and your huge mammoths and huge bots that you fought in that title could smash through things, trees getting broken down. All of those areas were in the title, but they've been enhanced here. There's probably more levels of procedural destruction of objects. They probably stay alive longer. The particle system is longer for the debris that bounces around, and all of these things will look closer to how they looked on the original Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4. But that traversal system and that destruction system just means that you can move around these kind of combat sections like this in game, and it allows the teams to build these dynamically and allow them to play out dynamically. These won't be hand placed elements. There might be some Houdini sections, such as when you shoot the turret off the back and it collapses down. That might be a prefix model that has a prefix destruction element, but that could happen anywhere in the level. It just plays out dynamically as a canned animation sequence. And again, due to the fact that there's that SSD in there, if they have utilized it very well, they could probably draw more of these in from the SSD and therefore have more canned animations, more routines that are not available on the PlayStation 5. So like a lot of things here, you'll see refinements to what is available here on the PS5, and it'll be cut down and reduced to what is on the PS4. One area I would want to quickly touch on is water. Big fan of water, love water in real life. I scuba dive, swimming, that's always a big been a passion of mine. And here, the water is superb. But it's not just the underwater, it's the surface water. They've really improved it massively from the original title. Full geometric bodies now, bobbing, swaying, lots of water, waves coming up and breaking on the shore. That caustics in the surface area by the beach. It bobs and interacts with objects. And it's not only that, but look at the way that the area is tessellated as it's running through this area. So you get that light, that lovely light bounces essentially. But look at the water in the distance breaking against those rocks, being split by all those posts, and that particle system kicks in, splashing water everywhere. And it happens mid-combat. It's doing all this whilst you're doing everything else. So this huge battle here with the mammoth at the end, I love the fact that that water keeps playing parts of it. It's splashing and bashing against the shore, breaking waves as you're fighting around the feet. And then again, all that particle system and light interaction. Look at the dust and the sand around its feet. Look at where the light and the shadow interacts with those areas. Look at the grounded area of everything in the title. That, the self-shadowing, the construction of the PBR-based materials, the way light bounces underneath, the way you get that bloom, you get that volumetric fog in the background. All of these things are very, very dense and very strong on the GPU. There's a lot of load here. And the sense that they're doing all of this by utilising the GPU itself to construct a lot of these elements. That particle system specifically is probably GPU driven, like a lot of elements now, and therefore it reduces the cost of the driver between the CPU and the GPU, and we are seeing significant improvements here. And I'm sure they can utilise a lot of this with programmable shaders over on the PS4, but obviously this is just the start of what the teams are already creating so far in a launch title. And remember, the launch title last generation was Killzone, and then we got Horizon Zero Dawn. Here we are getting a cross-generation launch title, which has started development way back when Horizon Zero Dawn shipped, most likely 2017, maybe slightly earlier, most likely. And now we're getting this on the PlayStation 5, and this was even before the PlayStation 5 was a thing. So the improvements here, the stark improvements for things like inverse kinematics, the interaction with the world, there's definitely areas they can improve, but I've touched on reasons why they're limited on how much they can improve, and that's what we're seeing in some of these elements in the interaction, the collision boxes and the vector boxes in terms of colliding with other objects and grass and areas. It's definitely much better, but there is areas that they could improve it more. But overall, everything in here impressed me. The only thing that impressed me was A, how much they're doing, and B, how the hell they're doing this with the fact that the PS4 is still part of their development cycle. It's beyond me. It's an incredible looking title, and I've not even touched on so many elements. And like I say, improvement to the volumetric cloud system they've got in the title, it looks even better than before. The improvement to the lighting, the bounce, the volumetrics across the game, the PBR based materials, and overall just everything that they've delivered in this little slice of what the game will be later on in 2021 just gets me anticipated for what we can expect in a few months to come, where we get another look at this. Maybe we'll even see some longer sections of gameplay before launch. Anyway, hopefully you guys and girls enjoyed this look at Horizon Zero Dawn from Guerrilla. It was an incredible demonstration for them, already kicking off that PlayStation 5 debut that they've got. And hopefully if you like this or anything else, then please like, subscribe, because remember, I'm completely self-funded and independent, and every click and every comment and every subscription that you give me down below really helps me improve my reach and my numbers, and it obviously means that you get access to all this content as soon as I put it up, and it means that I continue making this kind of content. Otherwise it's just not worth it. Anyway, I'm out, and I'll see you on the next one.
Always said a storm was coming.
Yeah. And it's almost here.